As I mentioned, we're continuing in a worship series this morning with an interesting concept. The idea that in a season of year when we're thinking about spring cleaning, we could also be doing some spiritual spring cleaning. You know, there are those seasons in our lives. We talked a little bit about that last weekend, where God has some changes and transitions in our lives, and it's time to wrestle with them a little bit. And when you are in the midst of spring cleaning, one of the typical things that you're about is what to keep, what to hold on to, what is important, what has priority. We spent last weekend talking about those opportunities and wrestling a little bit with the keep. If you didn't have a chance to hear that message, you can find it online. Now we have it in video as well as audio through the church website, or you can look it up at stuartluce.com. But you want to make sure that you have the right things to keep. And now this morning, we're going to talk about the next thing you might do in your spring cleaning, and that's what to trash, what to get rid of. What really should not be held on to, and it's time for that to go. And then next weekend, we'll end this short series by talking about what to give away, what to share with others. So as we think a little bit about trash and what needs to be gotten rid of. I mentioned last weekend that I had spent a little bit of time watching a couple episodes of Hoarders and Clean House. And those, I don't know if you ever watched those hoarder shows, but they are downright scary. And I remember this one scene. This woman was particularly into hoarding food. Even food that was, that needed to be thrown out. And the host of the show, he's dressed in like a hazmat suit, and he's wearing, surgical gloves, because they don't even touch this stuff this lady has. And she's got this bowl of something green. And he's like arguing with her, it's trash. And she's like, no, we have to hold on to it. And he's like, no, it's garbage. It's got to go. Sometimes we just hold on to some stuff in our life that is trash, and it needs to go. So we're going to wrestle with that and think on that a little bit this morning. But before I dive into that, it might be helpful to note that last weekend and this morning are really very interconnected. In order for us to have something to keep, something that has priority, something that has value, sometimes other things need to go. Well, let's just say you're cleaning out your garage, and the shelving unit is full of old junk. Well, if somebody gave you something new, or you went to the store, you wouldn't have any place to put it unless some other things get trashed. And that is true in many parts of our lives, particularly in our spiritual lives. For us to add a deeper prayer life, or to spend some time with Scripture, or to help and bless other people might mean that some other things need to go out to the curb in order to make that transition. So we're going to talk about what to trash, what to get rid of, what we really don't need to hold on to. So let's and I said this last weekend, what to trash is something you really need to decide for yourself. I can't tell you in your life what is trash and needs to go, but I can suggest some things, and you might kind of think on them and wrestle with them a little bit. So one thing that probably is trash, if there's some places of obvious sin in your life. And I have to say, I am not a pastor who preaches often on sin. I know some pastors and some churches are always kind of railing on sin. I guess I'm the type of person where I would rather talk about God's blessings and God's direction and guidance in our lives. But sometimes we just have to name that there is some sin that's getting in the way of the relationship that we are meant to have with God. So let me say a little bit about sin, because it's a word we don't hear or use all that often, and so maybe it needs kind of a little bit of explanation. The best way I know how to describe sin is to describe how the Bible describes it. The word used in the New Testament, the Greek word for sin, is hamartia. And the word literally means to miss the mark. To miss the mark. If we would think about this in terms of let's say, archery, which they would have used in the ancient world. The goal, of course, is to hit the bullseye, straight in the center. And the goal of our spiritual life, of faith life, is to, be right in, have that deep connection with God, that relationship with God. And anything that causes us to miss the mark, to miss the target, or to miss the bullseye is sin. Anything that gets in the way. And sometimes sin really divides us from God. And it's stuff that needs to go by the wayside. It needs to get trashed. I remember kind of learning this and thinking about this a number of years back. I was working with a young man who said he needed to meet with me right away, and he was kind of mysterious about why. And we were sitting in my office talking, and he shared that a couple days before he had been slashing tires, and he had been under the influence of cocaine while he was doing this. And as we talked, he had started to use that more and more. In fact, he was snorting cocaine every day. And as we talked and started to talk about the help that he needed to get, there was a moment when it was so clear how sin gets in the way. He said, I should have known that this was a problem. And this young man was just like 17. He said, but I have always felt a real good connection with God. I pray every day, or at least I used to, but I realize that the more cocaine I use, the less I care about God, the less I pray. I believe he actually said to me, the cocaine has become my God. He was more connected with that than he was with the God that he'd felt this relationship and this love and this connection with from the time he was a child. That's the way sin misses the mark, disconnects us from God. And it's trash, and it's got to go. There's that classic description from antiquity of the 7 deadly sins. 7 sins that get in the way. And if you think about those sins, each and every one of them help us miss the mark. Sins like lust. I knew this guy that was so into online porn that's all he could think about. That was his focus, and that was his connection. And the deeper he got into that, the less time he had for God. Or the 7 deadly sins, the classic one of pride. Pride is the focus on oneself. Look how good I am, and look at all the things I can do. Well, of course, if we're focused on ourselves and our own abilities and puffing ourselves up, we don't have time for God to guide and direct and help us in our lives. Or the 7 deadly sin of greed. If we're so focused on collecting and gathering and stuff for ourselves, then we don't have time to think about how we can bless and help and guide and take care of somebody else. Or the deadly sin of anger. How many relationships with God, relationships with family and friends and coworkers and neighbors have been damaged by anger? So our sin gets in the way, and it's trash. We got to get rid of it. Put it out at the curb to truly have that relationship we are supposed to with God. So that's maybe one thing that needs to go by the wayside. Maybe another thing, and just a suggestion, but for some folks, there's baggage. There's things from the past that just needs to go by the wayside. My wife says sometimes that there's a certain age where you don't get to blame your present behavior on your past. Where you just say, you know what, the things that have happened, how I was raised, or what happened to me as a child or whatever, I got to get rid of that. I'm the person that I choose to be. And sometimes that means getting rid of the trash, even when that trash is painful and difficult. Years ago, I was working with a lady that unfortunately was abused as a child. And this was really affecting her health and her faith relationship. And so I got her connected with a good counselor. And one of the things that this counselor recommended that she do, the person that abused her was a landlord, and he had been long dead. and she used to write these letters, getting out of her system the pain and the hurt and how that had affected her. And she used to go to the cemetery and leave them, to place them on his grave as a way to get rid of the vile things that he had done to her. That was her way of just exercising and putting out the trash, the baggage that she was holding on to, that was hurting her life of faith. Or I remember a guy that I was talking with one time, and he grew up, unfortunately, in a household where his dad didn't physically hit him, but always said he was stupid, and he was dumb, and he was worthless, and he would never amount to anything. And, a child hears that day after day after day. That affects who you are as a person. But as I got to know this guy more deeply, he was really good at his job. He had one of those jobs where he's kind of a troubleshooter, went around the company solving different problems and different situations. One time we were sitting talking, and I said to him, the things that your dad told to you, they are lies. You are really good at what you do. You are really good at solving these problems. You are not dumb. You are not stupid. You are not worthless. And like the look on his face, the sense of release, that he could throw that garbage, that trash that he had been carrying around for years from his dad, to just get rid of that. We see that so much in the life of Jesus. That Jesus, we're told, hung out with tax collectors and prostitutes and lepers and all kinds of folks that had all kinds of baggage from the past. And Jesus said, let's get rid of that and talk about where you're supposed to be now. And as if to remind me of this, I had 2 conversations with 2 different guys just this week where we were praying about letting go of the past. They have some deep challenges and difficulties from where they have been, and praying for where God will have them now and in the future. So sometimes we gotta get rid of the baggage. Or maybe another thing sometimes we gotta get rid of, put out at the trash, is unforgiveness. Sometimes we hold on to, and they're real, the pains and the difficulties and the challenges that we experience in life, but they are not going to help us to have the relationship with God and others that we're supposed to when we hold on to these things. There was a season in my life where I held on to unforgiveness. You may have heard me mention it was back in college years ago, and when my girlfriend dumped me and then started dating my best friend. And that was a season in my life where I wore like dark sunglasses everywhere I went, and never smiled, just kind of went around in a grimace everywhere I went. One of the things that really helped me to change that in my life, I went looking for it the other day. I could not find the song, but I remember the sense of the song was an old contemporary Christian song, and it talked about chains and being bound up and in jail. And the song had this part in it where you thought that you're chaining the other person and afflicting them. But at one point in the song, you realize we're the ones that are afflicted. We're the ones that are chained up. And when we let go of unforgiveness, it is us that we're freed. Jesus, when he talked about forgiveness, there's that great line in the scriptures where Peter asked Jesus, should I forgive someone 7 times? And the Jewish law actually said you should forgive someone 3 times. So Peter was getting it. He was like, well, should you do, more than twice that? Should you forgive 7? And Jesus said, no, Peter, you're to forgive 77 times. Or depending on how you translate it, they're not quite sure. He may have meant 7 times 70 times. And I always think Jesus said that not for the other person. He said that for us, that we would not be bound up by the hurts and challenges that are real from the past. They need to be thrown out. They're trash. They're garbage that's got to go. So I want to end with a scripture passage to just kind of wrap this up, to kind of summarize this. And I think this will make sense as we wrap this up with a scripture passage from the Gospel of Mark, one of the accounts of Jesus' life. So read this with me. So now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes, these are the religious leaders of Jesus' days, who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many traditions. They observe the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah the prophet prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips in the outside, but their hearts, the insides, are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." And then Jesus uses this as a teachable moment, expands this teaching. Then he called the crowd again and he said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out, the inside trash, is what defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly, many more even than the 7 deadly sins. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." This trash has got to go. Maybe think about it like the hoarder lady. You come to her house and she says, "Oh, I've cleaned the outside of the bowl or the cup," but what inside is gross green garbage. It's got to go. And our trash the same. Got to go. And then we're free to think about what we might give away, which we'll end with next weekend.